Welcome to this explainer. Okay, I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this material today because we're going to explore the very boundaries of our own minds. We are going on a journey into the limits of our own understanding. It's a theme that echoes all the way back to antiquity and Plato's paradox of inquiry, which essentially asks, how do we search for something if we don't even know what it is we don't know? Well, today we're going to map exactly where our knowledge ends and where our overconfidence begins.
Okay, let's dive right into this with a totally relatable situation. Imagine a 4-year-old child in that unbridled curiosity phase. You're sitting there and they ask you to explain something totally mundane. Tell me all about our car, or how does a zipper work? If you're like most adults, you start off pretty confident, right? You know what a zipper is, but within a few seconds your ability to explain the actual mechanics just grinds to a halt. You quickly hit the outer bounds of your understanding and realize you're going to have to look it up. We are remarkably familiar with these everyday objects, yet remarkably ignorant of how they actually function.
As it turns out, there is some really fascinating science behind this exact phenomenon. Back in 2002, Yale researchers Leonid Rosenblatt and Frank Kiel conducted what we can basically call the zipper test. They asked undergraduate students to rate their understanding of everyday devices, things like zippers, flush toilets, and sewing machines, on a scale of 1 to 7. Most students confidently slapped down a 7. But then, the researchers asked them to write out step by step exactly how the device worked. And oh man, as the participants struggled to articulate the mechanics, their confidence just totally deflated. When asked to re-rate themselves afterward, a whole lot of those confident 7s plummeted to a highly humbled 2.
And this beautifully sets up a foundational concept in the research for us. As Rosenblatt and Kiel put it, and this quote captures it perfectly, we are all subject to an illusion of explanatory depth. We mistake our surface-level familiarity with an object for a deep mechanical understanding of it. We are incredibly easy to fool, especially when the person fooling us is ourselves.
Section 1. The Big Theory. The Dunning-Kruger Effect.
Let's move on and see how this builds from our ignorance of physical things, like those zippers, to our ignorance of our own internal skills and abilities. It takes us to one of the most famous and, frankly, most frequently misunderstood concepts in modern psychology. Formalized in 1999 by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, the Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias describing a very specific, systematic error in human judgment. It basically states that people with low ability in a specific isolated area have a pronounced tendency to give overly positive assessments of their own ability in that exact area.
Now, I really want to emphatically correct a massive misconception here. In pop culture, you'll often hear the Dunning-Kruger effect used as a punchline, essentially claiming that stupid people are too stupid to know they're stupid. That is absolutely not what the science says. This bias does not apply to general intelligence. It applies to everyone. The first rule of the Dunning-Kruger Club: you don't know you're in it. The effect kicks in whenever any of us steps outside our specific domain of expertise. It is about a lack of skill in a particular task, not a lack of general brain power.
Section 2. Measuring our ignorance. So, how do psychologists actually prove this cognitive blind spot exists? By comparing subjective self-assessment, so how well you think you did, with objective performance, how well you actually did. And this chart brilliantly illustrates the stark reality of our overconfidence. This data comes right from Dunning and Kruger's original 1999 study, where undergrads were tested on logical reasoning, grammar, and humor. Look at the bottom quartile here, the lowest performers. Their actual test scores placed them in the 12th percentile, but when asked to estimate their performance relative to their peers, they ranked themselves in the 62nd percentile. They were near the very bottom, yet they genuinely believed they were performing above average. Interestingly, though, the data also reveals a reverse effect at the very top of the spectrum. Highly skilled individuals often undervalue their relative standing. Why? Well, it's because of something called the false consensus effect. If a task comes super easy to a high performer, they just naturally, but completely incorrectly, assume it's got to be just as easy for everyone else. They don't overestimate their raw score, but they definitely underestimate how exceptional their skills actually are compared to the rest of the group.
Section 3. Why does this happen?
So, what's the actual root cause here? Well, the psychological community is actually super divided on the exact mechanics behind this cognitive bias. Researchers have proposed multiple competing explanations. Some say it's a metacognitive failure, a glitch in our self-monitoring systems. Others argue it's literally just a statistical artifact, like regression to the mean. Others point to rational prior beliefs, how skill levels are distributed, or even just a lack of incentive in testing environments. To really grasp the source material, we need to look neutrally at the heavyweights in this debate.
Let's put the two leading theories face to face. On the left, we have Dunning and Kruger's original theory, the dual burden. This argues that incompetent people suffer two burdens. First, they lack the skill, and second, because they lack the skill, they lack the metacognitive ability to recognize what a good performance even looks like. They're just blind to their own flaws. Now, on the right is the primary counter-theory, noise plus bias. Researchers like Gilles Guignac argue that this is largely a statistical artifact, regression to the mean, combined with the general human tendency to just assume we're better than average. In this view, you don't need any metacognitive blindness to explain the data.
And then there's a third, really compelling alternative called the rational model. This theory suggests that people simply rely on their prior beliefs. If you go into a quiz expecting to do well and you answer a few questions you aren't entirely sure about, your brain naturally defaults to assuming you got those specific questions right based on your pre-existing optimism. Again, no complex inability to evaluate yourself is needed here, just a baseline of positive expectations skewing the final self-assessment.
Section 4. The real-world stakes. Now, is this just some academic debate about logic puzzles? Absolutely not. When this cognitive gap leaves the laboratory and enters our everyday lives, it carries massive real-world stakes. In aviation, overconfidence can literally lead pilots to operate aircraft or attempt maneuvers that are way beyond their actual proficiency. In medicine, physicians in training have to be constantly monitored for overconfidence just to ensure patient safety. Over in business, an uninformed buyer might vastly overpay for a used car simply because they don't know enough to spot the hidden risks. And on a personal level, this effect can lead people to pursue entire career paths that they are fundamentally unfit for, while high performers might pass up incredible opportunities simply because they underestimate their own worth.
But hey, it's actually not all doom and gloom. So the crucial point here is how this bias interacts with achieving our goals. Dunning's theory breaks goal realization down into two phases. In step 1, preparatory planning, overconfidence is incredibly dangerous. If a general ignores the need for reserve troops because he's overly optimistic, disaster strikes. But in step 2, the execution phase, the illusion actually flips into a huge benefit. Once a plan is in motion, overconfidence can provide the sheer motivation, inspiration, and energy needed to push through massive obstacles. It's totally a double-edged sword.
Section 5. The kicker.
We've looked at the data, the competing theories, and the real-world consequences. But if we zoom back out, we realize that brilliant minds have noticed this quirk of human nature for centuries. Charles Darwin famously noted that ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. Bertrand Russell observes something strikingly similar. The science we've been exploring today is really just the rigorous measurement of a timeless human flaw.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is bringing the focus directly back to you. We laughed earlier about failing the zipper test, right? But what happens when you apply that exact same test to your own internal life? Have you ever asked yourself to explain, step by step, the deep motivations, structures, and decisions that control your everyday behaviors? If you tried to write it down, would your confidence score plummet from a 7 down to a 2? The research suggests it just might. Keep that intellectual humility close and keep